Hi and welcome back to the channel, and welcome back to my review of the Stephen King book Duma Key. Duma Key is a book from around 2008, something like that. Why do they never bloody put years in these? But it's around that time anyway. As you can see, my copy is a bit battered and a bit bruised, just on the cover and just on the outside. Lots of evidence of wear and tear. And while you could think about replacing something like this, it's a pretty good allegory or statement for what the film is and what the film is about. Because Duma Key is a film about lots of things that are broken and maybe seen better days. And unlike my book here, which has never been restored to new glories, this is about people who can change and are moulded and move in that direction. So I'm going to talk about Duma Key. I'm going to talk about it in a non-spoiler way first, but generally I'm not worried about that. This is for people who have read and appreciate Duma Key to generate some discussion about the book itself. So if you haven't read it, go and read the damn thing. For me, it's one of Stephen King's best books, especially when you consider later post-accident King. So when talking about Duma Key, what's it about? And I've just said you probably read it, but let's do a recap in case it's been some time since you have been in the world of Duma Key. So Duma Key follows the story of Edgar Fremantle. And Edgar Fremantle is a businessman who was a very successful businessman. He ran a construction company and he was quite wealthy. He was a very hands-on wealthy man, but due to a tragic accident, he loses both his arm, but an awful lot of his brain capacity, as he has a brain injury that causes him to stammer and slur speak and actually just get confused about what he's saying, that causes him major anger issues. And he takes those out on the ones that he loves, and he takes those out on the people that are closest to him, and he feels a bit helpless in that regard. As part of his rehabilitation, he decides he needs a new break and a new space in life. His marriage is broken down with his wife, and he's going to try and rehabilitate himself and take him off to somewhere new. So he takes himself off to Duma Key in Florida, a fictional place that's set in and around the Keys of Florida. Now why he picks here, he just feels compelled or drawn to it. When he's here, he decides to, as part of his rehabilitation, kind of take up a hobby. Unlike many people, use it as some sort of therapy, and in this case it'll be art therapy for him. He's going to start drawing again, something he did in the past that he enjoyed, but he never took it any further. As life took over and took its toll, he now has the time to do it. So he takes it back up, and yet when he takes it up, he finds himself having a sort of outer body experience. Now, for anybody that's done any of the arts beforehand, this isn't an all unusual thing. Anybody who sings, anybody who plays, anybody who's performed, drawn, when you're going through the act of creativity or art, sometimes you lose concept of where you are in space and time, and everything kind of flows through you. It's what makes art as a concept really one of the most transcendent things that we can do, I think, as human beings. And that's what Edgar Fremantle decides to do, channel himself in. But it's when he starts to draw that he realizes that maybe the things that he's drawn are not as fine art as he thinks. They seem to represent events and people that he knows, and events, things that he couldn't possibly have known happen. So Duma Key starts at this point, but really what Duma Key is about the people that are in it, because he is here in isolation by himself, living in what he calls the pink house, and he has neighbours, and the most prominent of these neighbours are an old lady who has Alzheimer's called Libby Eastlake, and her carer, a man called Jerome, I think he's Wireman. I've said this in my wrap up, but I called him Moorman for the whole of the read in my head. It just seemed to give him an extra bit of something special as it went along. And they are broken in their own ways. Libby Eastlake, like I say, she's the young heiress who kind of owns most of Duma Key. Her dad owned it, and she owns the land, etc. around it, but she's got Alzheimer's. And she has moments of lucidness that appear and punctuate the book at various points, and you feel as the reader that each of these periods of lucidness are going to reveal something as we get the true self coming through before she disappears again into the background. And Werman has his own problems. He's trying to rebuild his life and rebuild his relationship, and he's devoted himself to looking after Ms. Eastlake after losing his wife and his daughter. All of these things that people carry and these weights that people carry around behind them. They're trying to rebuild their life and channel it into somewhere new. So while we have these central characters in Florida, we have Edgar's family at the background. He has 2 daughters, one who's very prominently in the book in Isle, and then his other daughter who seems to be a bit floating in the background but a bit more detached from what's going on, and then his wife, ex-wife, who has her own life and is rebuilding her own life in some way after the disaster of trying to manage through Edgar's rehabilitation, which hasn't went well, which has left her feeling scared and threatened. And for all of these great characters that are in here, unusually for me, for Stephen King anyway, you're made to like all of them, even the ones that you initially go, you shouldn't have done that, you shouldn't have been that role. It gets illustrated and examined, and even Edgar's relationship with his ex-wife, he doesn't really blame her. He kind of blames his accident on how their relationship broke down, and maybe the things that he can't remember, or things happened that pushed her overboard and made her afraid and scared of him. So the first real key theme that I want to talk about is the idea of healing. And certainly the main character of the film that I haven't really talked about is the place of Duma Key itself, the case of the pink house. It's very much going to heal Edgar, or what he feels is going to heal him. And while Edgar was driven by success really early in life, he's reticent when people start praising his art, because, you know, he's a successful person. Everybody just sees him as one of these people that's just gifted or talented, so whatever he turns his hand to is success. But he knows in his heart of heart that he has a certain detachment with his success in art, in that he knows it comes and channels through him, but it's coming from another place of him that he doesn't really understand. And there's some great quotes that are within this book that kind of illustrate this in some way. He says, "My accident really taught me one thing. The only way to go on is go on. I can do this." And this kind of idea is what propels Edgar forward. It kind of pushes him forward to say, look, I'm just going to keep on doing this because it seems to be helping me and help his rehabilitation. And he does feel that he is getting better. You can measure it in some ways, how far he can walk, the measurables that you can see that he's getting better, but also mentally and his security. And as he builds relationships with people who genuinely seem to like and care for him, whether that's Werman, whether it's Libby, whether it's Jack, who looks after him on a current basis, he can see that he's a popular and well-liked person. So he can build new relationships, he can rebuild himself as a new version of himself, while still being have his hang-ups of the past. And this idea that he uses art to funnel himself through, that he invests an awful lot of time and energy in, it's also a book about loss. He's lost his marriage, he's lost an arm. So it's about losing people and things. Libby, her family has lost so much. There's this idea that there are people, especially young women, that are being taken by the key itself. She's lost sisters, she's lost brothers-in-laws, she's lost lots of people in her life, and she's been on her own. She has Werman now to look after her, and she has people that have gravitated to her, but she's also lost her original home. She seems to have moved down and away from the original house, and we have this idea within the world that things are missing. Things are missing all the time, and again, it's not just the arm on Edgar himself. It's in his paintings. He's looking at his paintings, he steps back from his paintings and he goes, something's not right here, something's missing. And here speaks to King as a writer. He writes horror books, but for me, they're always just more unsettling than horrorful. My favourite parts of King's books are that bit where you don't really know what's going on. There's just something not quite right there. There's just something that I can't quite grab to say, ooh, I know what that is. That's what it is. And better than that, what makes Duma Key, I think, such a roaring success for me is the fact that he presents options, lots of different options of what it could be. And I'll come back to that in a second, because this idea of life. Where is this extra life coming from? Another thing that I think is really fantastic in the book, especially with this idea of loss, is that a lot of the book examines about loss in the past for all of our characters. So Werman's daughter and wife, how he lost them and how that affected him. Libby Slake, her family, the people that were lost, they've never seen again. We don't know what happened to them, but they carry a weight on her. And they nearly, while not being responsible for Alzheimer's, they feel like the weight that sinks her and keeps her under. And when it makes the moments where she's lucid rise above, and you kind of feel like there's the real person underneath that's not bowed down by this weight of this loss. And then you have the loss that happens within the book. The characters that are killed, the characters that you really don't want to die, you don't want anything bad to happen. That's what creates an awful lot of drive, turning page to page within the book, but yet somehow makes sense in this world. And I think those key deaths or those key events are what really give it its edge. Because I think he could have ended this book numerous times. The amount of times when he's selling his paintings and art, and I thought, God, this book feels like it's wrapping up about now. It's coming to a positive conclusion. I mean, I should have known that wasn't a conclusion because it was too uplifting. And then I'm looking, going, there's hundreds of pages to go yet. He could have ended it many times. He could have, when they went to the old homestead of the Eastlake family, they could have went there and came out there. They could have finished the whole thing and wrapped up the mystery by what happened in the house, but they didn't. They had to come back. There had to be one final loss. There had to be that one final death. There had to be the people that were near deaths, the people that, you know, your direction is pointed that way, but really what's happening is over here somewhere, and you don't see it because you're concentrated. Stephen King has drawn your eye here, and he just writes characters so wonderfully well that you really care for what's going to happen to these people, for what's going to happen to the people that they love. But the key thing that I take away that this book is about, and remember this is not long after King's own accident himself, is about how these things that are dead or that are supposed to be dead have life. So things that are buried and are dead may become life. And for a long part of the film, you're made to think about this missing limb, because it seems to be the missing limb is what's driving his art. It seems to be the missing limb, or the supernatural element of this missing arm, is what's being the driving force, and nearly like it has a sentience or life of its own. And you think to yourself as the reader, you think, is this a story about phantom arms? So like, you've seen these things even going back to Boris Karloff days in the movies, or you know, the arm that's been cut off and the arm that's dead is actually the thing committing the murder, and he's an innocent party or otherwise, and that's certainly a possibility. But you have also relationships that are dead. You know, is marriage at the very start of the book, it's dead, it's buried, but has it got a life of its own? Is there still life that breathes out in there? His relationships with his kids, I mean, the relationship with Isle just seems so strong the way through. She believes in him the whole way through, but his relationship with his other daughter isn't as strong. Can you bring that back to life? These are things that are supposed to be dead, but as part of his rehabilitation, seem to have a life of their own. Even Libby Eastlake herself, she's lost two sisters. She's lost another sister. You people that went missing, never heard from again. Her own father, her favourite toys, they all seem to be dead, but do they have a life of their own? And the same for the house and the houses. Her old homestead, all the houses along this big pink. It's talked about that there's life in Big Pink itself, and when you think to yourself, well, if it's not the arm that's rehabilitating or getting better, giving him these extra powers, it's the house, it's the area, it's the surrounding place that's giving him life. And the old homestead, being the house that everybody forgot, seems to have within that whole area a life of its own. Now we know when we find out what's responsible for that life, it's that kind of darker power that seems to like ear in the background of an awful lot of King's work, and that there's a malevolent kind of force there at work that's driving an awful lot of these things for its own purposes. It wants to capture. And we also get explained how it went from being a support or otherwise to being dark and turned. It was only when people turned on it that it turned on everybody else. And even the dead family, these things are supposed to be dead as well. You know, the sisters are supposed to be dead, but are they really? In classic King form, he doesn't waste anything. And there's like a key, I've tried to pick up another key quote from the book, and it's basically that our memories have voices too. Often sad ones that clamour like raised arms in the dark. And certainly that is, I think, the embodiment of what the second half of this book especially is about this life that's breathed into things that are supposed to be long dead or not have life. And the last thing that I really want to touch on is this idea of the past, the present and the future. Certainly for Edgar himself. I mean, Werman has that phrase that's used that says, do the day and let the day do you. So basically exist in each day and let it do what it wants to do for you, but you live your life in that period, or certainly that's what I took it at the time. And when Edgar's doing his rehabilitation, that's really what he's trying to do. He's trying to put one foot in front of the other. He's trying to walk a bit further down the beach and walk back. He's trying to make relationships with people and walk back. He's trying to draw a better painting. He wants to progress. He has this inner drive in him. He was a successful man, so that's what he's going to do. And in the end, is he able to do that? That's really what the drive. You kind of want what's the best for both him. You want the best for Libby Slick. You want the best for Werman. You want the best for everybody that's around there. And that is really where the joy of Duma Key comes from. Now, you may debate its greatness. For me, it's a 5-star read. For other people, it may be, you know, 4, 4.5. Whatever it is, I think it's fair to say that there is a strength in the characters. There's a strength that's always there in King's writing. I think he plays with the foreshadowing that he does in an awful lot of his books, but actually does a lot of misdirect in this because of the possibilities that are open to it. There are a lot of different threads that he eventually does tie together in an extremely satisfying way. So while Duma Key is a horror story, the terror comes from the unsettling nature of the mystery of it, and for the hope that you don't want certain characters to meet a grisly end or a darkened end. And I encourage you to reread Duma Key at some stage if you haven't in a long time, to think about and discuss many of the points that I've talked about here. Is there more than missing that I could have drummed out of the pages that I have in this book, or have I misinterpreted something? As I like to often say, I make these videos to nearly kind of make wrong opinions, because if I've got something kind of wrong, that's kind of even more fun to discuss. If that's what the case, certainly get down in the comments, and I'll speak to you again soon. Take care.